So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As you know, on March 30th from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Peake ReLeaf and Marion, Maine will be partnering up to hold a virtual expungement clinic, also in partnership with the Maryland Medical Dispensary Association, Minorities from Medical Marijuana, the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association, and law firm Shulman Rogers. So joining me today to discuss the importance of expungement and some related issues is Rita Montoya, attorney, lifelong activist, general counsel, and founder of the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association. For those who she looks familiar to, you may remember that she joined us for a community spotlight concerning the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association during a voting drive in October of last year. So thank you, Rita, for joining us today and contributing and partnering with us to help make sure the word gets out about the expungement clinic and that we can positively affect as many lives as possible. So thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. This is such an important topic, so I'm really glad that you're bringing light to some of these issues.
Definitely. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with expungement clinics and the feedback that you've received from the community as a result?
Yeah, expungement is something that's really important to me. I was a public defender. That's the first legal job that I had. It's the job I thought I'd have my entire career. Mm-hmm. And so I continuously came into contact with folks who were getting caught up because they had these past convictions or arrests or interactions, contacts with law enforcement. Mm-hmm. And those things come up when you're applying for jobs. They come up when you're applying for rentals, background checks, you want to volunteer at your child's school. Those kinds of things are going to show up. So I've known for a really long time how important it is to have those types of things expunged and have access to that. There are some states, that wipe them out. Maryland isn't one of them. Mm-hmm. So it's really important for the community to really rally around and help folks get these cleared out, whether they're for cannabis or other things. CPAA held a self-advocacy expungement clinic last September in 2020. Mm-hmm. And that was to teach people how to do it themselves. A lot of people can, the things are pretty minor, pretty easy to transfer the information on for the forms that they need. They might be able to just do it themselves, go get their background check. Mm-hmm. Other folks are going to need assistance. Sometimes it gets pretty complicated, or sometimes you just don't understand how to do it. So it's really important that these expungement clinics take place for folks to have access.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think has contributed to the seemingly increased appearance of expungement clinics or fairs? I mean, I feel like we've seen them a lot more in recent years, obviously with Maryland's market being relatively new in comparison to others. Maybe that's one of the reasons, but why do you think that's been the case?
I think it might just be more awareness. Public defenders' offices have been hosting these kinds of things and these events for a very long time. We're here in the DC area. The Public Defender Service of the District of Columbia has been holding an expungement fair every summer since I was in law school, and that was in 2005. So they've been out on the front lines leading these charges for a really, really long time, on top of their caseloads, with little to no extra funding to do so. And I think now that we've had, thankfully, this movement for people to become more aware about the race issues, about the ways that those race issues are intertwined within our criminal justice system and our justice system generally, that they've become more aware that these are things that we should be doing. Mm-hmm. I think that obviously has transferred over to the cannabis industry, whether we're talking about medicinal or, adult use or recreational, whatever the term is in that particular jurisdiction. And I would like to think as a lawyer that the legal bar has become more aware that this is necessary and just. And, these things can't get done without lawyers. And so I think it's really incumbent upon the bar to take responsibility. You don't have to be a criminal defense lawyer. You don't have to be a cannabis lawyer to care about this. Mm-hmm. Any lawyer can learn how to fill out these forms and submit them. And because society actually expects the person who has the conviction or arrest or contact to do it themselves. That's what the states say. You can just do this yourself. It's no big deal. And some of them even provide it's free. You don't have to pay a fee. Mm-hmm. But we know that even though law was supposed to be for the people, that's not always what happens. And so people do need help. So, I think there's a little more awareness on everyone's part. But again, public defenders have been in there doing the work for a really long time. So I'm glad to see that it's kind of becoming mainstream, if you will, and that everyone's really pitching in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've seen, at least comparatively, is a difference in focus between state convictions and arrests and federal convictions and arrests. Why do you think there's such a disparity there? Why do you think the focus is on one and the resources is on one as opposed to the other?
I think that there's this disparity between federal and state because of a lack of awareness. Most people may not be aware that when we're talking about high frequencies of police contact, arrest, conviction, it's at the state and local levels. When you think about your day-to-day interactions, those aren't occurring on federal property for most people. Even if you live in the DC area, it is a little trickier. But even then, and especially if we're talking about cannabis contacts,
Mm-hmm.
you have to have a pretty significant amount of cannabis or a significant amount of transactions or complexities to really be on the radar of the federal law enforcement. And then even if you're on the radar, it's whether or not they're going to put their resources towards that. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think, and I say this based on my experience as a public defender, as a criminal defense lawyer, my clients that I were seeing rarely, if ever, had federal contact. I mean, off the top of my head, I can think of only one who was federally incarcerated and had, some minor state offense that we had to deal with that just popped up when he
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
entered the system. And so most people were going to be talking about local and state law enforcement. And so the lack of resources there is a significant issue. And that's why you have, public defenders after hours running these clinics to do these things, or people just popping up to try to scrape some resources together to do it. It is important to put resources and manpower towards federal convictions as well. It is. But I think that especially if we're trying to talk about the disparity of police and law enforcement contact with Black and brown people, then the absolute focus must be on state and local, because that's where our people are feeling that burden and that oppression.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously there are Black and brown people who are being prosecuted and have been convicted for cannabis related crimes at the federal level. Absolutely. But most are white males. Mm. And so when we talk about then, not just in the context of the criminal justice system or the context of expungement, but in cannabis, when we talk about giving back, fighting against the war on drugs, elevating Black and brown communities because of all of the oppression that we have faced as, Black people, Indigenous people, Latinx people, is putting our resources and our time and our energies to address federal convictions. Does that meet that goal? I guess that's the question that I would ask people that are doing that. If that is the goal, a sort of reparations, if you will, in one form, right, to assist our communities to get here by taking those convictions away and whatnot. Right. If your resources and monies aren't actually being used for Black and brown people, are we meeting that goal? Right. And I would question that. So, I would really like to see our cannabis companies focus on what's needed in the communities that they're in, not even at the state level. You're in Baltimore City, great. Connect with the people in Baltimore City, because everywhere you are, there are people doing the work. Right. And they are usually Black and brown, and they are understaffed and under-resourced. Right. And so to go and then, put up this platform as being socially just and woke and you're helping, and that is all fine, but not if the people down the street from your dispensary are suffering and you could help. So I guess that would be kind of my challenge to the industry, is to look local and help local.
And I think that's a very needed and welcome challenge for the industry. I think, far too often we see instances where, there's a proclamation of, we align ourselves with these organizations that are doing the work, that are invested in social equity, that are invested in reform, that are invested in correcting injustices, but we don't see the follow-up with the community that immediately surrounds those businesses. We don't see how interwoven the, companies' business models, or, everything from their staffing to their supply chain. We don't see all these things interwoven with community needs, with reflecting how they can positively impact the community, and reflecting a more consistent mission outside of, today we'll just put up a nice little social equity post, or, when something happens, we'll put up a nice, we're listening, like where's the actual action that's being done. So kind of piggy.
Exactly.
Okay.
And partnering with organizations that are connected to the communities, that know the true community needs.
Mm-hmm.
If your entire social equity organization or business or platform is white led and run, how are you connected to our communities?
Right. Right.
Reading about it is not the same.
Right.
And there are Black and brown people doing the work. They just need funding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely, definitely. And kind of piggybacking on that, you brought up funding these organizations that are actively doing the work, that are on the ground, that are on the front lines, trying to make this a consistent action that's being done. How else can businesses that exist in the cannabis space continue to provide direct services to justice neglected communities?
I think you need to be aware of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the first thing is, be aware of the organizations, or, they might not even be a formal organization because that costs money. There are community groups, there are community activists. Get to know your community. You are a neighbor now. You might not live there. You might go home at the end of the day, but you are a neighbor. And so you need to know your community, and they'll let you know what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And then, if we're talking about the wider scope of expungement, there are folks out there, again, doing the work, National Expungement Week. They've been around and they are a national organization, but from what I've seen, they have boots on the ground in these spaces who are curating programs specific to the needs of that particular community. Because what you need in Baltimore City might be different than what you need in Calvert County, than what you need in Anne Arundel. But we don't know that until we get in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's great to have something local like what Peake ReLeaf and Marion Maine have set up, to partner with a local law firm, with organizations founded and run by people of color who are connected to the issues, who can really provide that local curated event for people to come and feel comfortable to receive those services. And those are the types of things that we need to have happening.
Definitely. And kind of on the flip side of that, how would you empower patients to kind of demand that accountability and demand that transparency and demand that the cannabis businesses that are asking for their money, asking for their resources, their endorsement even, how would you equip a patient to better demand this type of action from cannabis businesses in this space?
I would say ask. It's the same thing I tell my kids: use your voice. The one thing no one can ever take from you, your voice. Whatever way you do it, you don't feel comfortable speaking, that's okay. Write something. You don't know how to write, tell a friend and have them help you figure out how to get that message out there. Everyone knows I'm not afraid to say anything or ask questions. So I will ask people, what are you doing locally?
Right.
I think it's great. I saw that you gave this to this national organization doing X. How does that benefit Marylanders? Because that's the jurisdiction I'm currently in. How does that benefit Montgomery County? Because that's where I live. And I don't take no for an answer. Don't give me your feel good answer. We're going to dig deeper than that.
Right. We believe that, expungement is part of a larger move towards real, reform, real criminal justice reform. And we've seen things like, HB 32, the Cannabis Legalization and Regulation, Inclusion, Restoration, and Rehabilitation Act come forward as efforts towards that type of reform. And, just as way of introduction, for those that aren't familiar, it was legislation that would legalize personal possession and home cultivation for adults, automatically expunge past cannabis offenses, establish a social equity program to ensure inclusion in the industry from disproportionately impacted communities, and reinvest a portion of that tax revenue to communities hardest hit by the war on drugs. So having said all of that, my question is, how integral do you feel expungement and or shielding needs to be when it comes to reform and real change in the cannabis space?
It needs to be what should be leading the charge. We shouldn't even have medical markets without talking about expungement and shielding and decreasing, if not eliminating, cannabis arrests, convictions, and contacts. We know even here in Maryland that even though there's not a law precluding medical cannabis access by qualified patients while they're on probation or while they're incarcerated and whatnot, that's not happening. There's no system in place. And in fact, in the past, there's been bills to explicitly preclude that from happening. So either cannabis needs to be medicine or it's not. And if we're not protecting medical cannabis patients' rights to access those things under all circumstances, then we're definitely not doing so for those who may not be able to become a qualified patient for whatever reason. So I think that we shouldn't even be having conversations about legalization or adult use markets without including that. But not including it is not enough. It's not enough to say, okay, we're going to have a social equity office, or we're going to have some social equity licenses. Okay, well, who are we giving those to? Because if you're a Latinx millionaire, is that a social equity license?
Mm.
If you're a white Latino, is that a social equity license? And that's the thing, is these are the nuances of being a person of color, of living in a community of color, of being Indigenous, Latinx, Black, and they are not properly thought about because there's not enough of us in the rooms where these conversations are being held.
That's right.
So, instead what we're getting we're getting these checklists that say, well, I tried to hire a Black person, but it just didn't work out, but give me the points. Okay. That's not social equity. So my challenge to the industry would be that if our governments are not going to properly lay out these regulations to truly capture social equity and to truly bring Black, Indigenous, and Latinx communities into this cannabis boom, then it's incumbent upon the companies in the industry to do it. Mm-hmm. And this expungement clinic is one example of a great way to do that.
Kind of touching on companies that exist in this space, in your experience and in your opinion, what do you think contributes so much to the pushback of companies that actively speak about taking a stance or actively make mention of taking a stance on social media or on the website or what have you? Why do you think they're so apt to do that and not do things like expungement clinics, or not campaign for patient rights, or not live and contribute to the communities that their businesses exist in? What do you think the reason for that pushback is?
I can appreciate how challenging it is to run a business. I come from a family of small business owners. I've seen it day in and day out. A lot of times it's a one-man show. Mm-hmm. And especially then when you add on the complexities of operating in an industry that is highly regulated, but also very unregulated, an industry where things are ever changing. Mm-hmm. There's always an underlying fear because of the federal illegalities. There's a lot of uncertainties of the market. It's a very high risk market from a legal and financial standpoint. That's a lot to handle. And I really can appreciate that. And I think that sometimes it's honestly just easier to put up some social media stuff or to just write a check out to a well-known organization rather than create your own or partner with a couple of others to create something, or give funding to a lesser known organization that you think probably is going to do okay, but you're just not sure. So let me just write it to these guys, and I can understand and appreciate all of that. But what we need at this point is cannabis mavericks. This same old is not working. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We need our legislators also. We need maverick legislators to stand up and not just think about the economics and the business and the revenues that are going to come. Because if we don't build these markets in a solid way, that reflects badly on cannabis consumers as well. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? If the markets aren't regulated properly, then the consumers don't have access to the things they need, or it's not working out. We see that in the medical market. Medical cannabis users are not having access to some of the things that they need. You can barely find any CBD flower or RSOs in the Maryland medical market right now. Hemp is not the same. Hemp CBD is not the same. Mm-hmm. But you see it everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so, I think whatever we're going to have, it needs to be what it's supposed to be. And the companies can assist with actual actions, right? And it is hard, but I've seen the employees at these companies, and they are dedicated and they are passionate and they are knowledgeable, and they're out there doing things outside of the company. So why not just bring everyone into the fold? There's a lot of collaboration that could be had. And so that's one thing I would like to see more of too, is just this cross collaboration. It's not businesses versus patients. It's not advocates versus businesses. There's a lot of space where we can really come together to make these things happen.
Definitely. And one of the things that I'm really hoping to see less of an adversarial relationship between some of these companies and the communities that they exist in. There should be no reason why you can have a multi-million-dollar business in a company that doesn't see that revenue or doesn't see the positive impact from that revenue, and you're not doing anything from a social equity standpoint or a community empowerment standpoint or a reform standpoint, but you can still take advantage of being in the space and making that profit. So when I say adversarial, I definitely do not mean primarily patients being adversarial towards businesses. I mean businesses being adversarial towards their communities by virtue of not contributing to those communities. So I'm hopeful that we'll see that change, and I'm hopeful that for those who are passionate about that change, that they are given the resources to continue that fight. And I'm hoping for a lot more transparency. I'm hoping for transparency from at a business level, at an ownership level, so that there's like accountability that's in place as well. So communities can clearly say, you promised this, you said you were going to do this. Now let's see some traceability. Let's see where your words stacked up with your actions. Let's see who you worked with. Let's see what their morals and their stances were in regards to empowerment of our community. So I'm hopeful that we'll see that.
Well, and that's what I'm looking for, I guess, is the accountability. And that's where I think that government plays a role. It is not enough to say, well, everyone has to take an action towards social equity within X amount of years after getting your license. Okay, well, what are you allowed to include in that? This A for effort is not enough anymore.
Right.
Our communities are suffering. Our communities are still in shackles and cages while these billions of dollars are being made. And so, where does that come in? And I think that then that's when it's up to the communities to go to our legislators and use our voice to say, you're allowing these companies to operate. What are they doing for our communities? And that's then where businesses need to be held accountable to say, well, this is what I'm doing. And they need to show meaningful efforts. And how are we allowing that? Is it because all of your bud tenders are Black or brown? And is that enough?
Right.
Are we allowing that to be enough? But there's no one above basic management level, no one with decision-making authority. Is it enough that you're in a quote unquote bad neighborhood? Well, if all you're doing there is making money,
right,
then are you doing well, or are you just taking advantage?
Right.
So these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have, but we need to have them with the people that can hold them accountable. And those are our legislators.
I totally agree. And, like I said, I'm hopeful that, when we have those maverick legislators that you mentioned before, that they'll, take some of these companies to task and just provide that accountability that I think will enrich the patient relationship. It does a lot for trust in the patient community when they can see that when you promise something, you're actively doing it, and you provide the means to be held accountable for saying that you did it. I think that makes the industry better. I think that makes the communities that the industries are part of better, and it just makes cannabis look better overall. Is there anything, lastly, that, you would like to speak on regarding expungement and its importance, anything that you'd like to stress to our patient community as we kind of move forward and hopefully, look towards a great turnout for the expungement clinic that we have next week?
Yeah, I would just encourage anyone to learn about expungement, because you can help someone else. You don't have to be a lawyer to help someone get their record clear. You don't have to be a lawyer to show someone where the resources are. You don't have to be a lawyer to help someone fill out a form, which is basically what ends up happening. There are a lot of people that can help others. You don't have to be a lawyer. The law is supposed to be accessible to people. And so I would just encourage you to do so. At CPAA, we do have the resources that we can send out to anybody who asks for them. We're going to work on getting those up on our website, so there's just a one-stop shop for people to head to. The Public Defender Service of the District of Columbia also recently released a re-entry advisory guide, which is really helpful for folks re-entering society after periods of incarceration in the DC area. It's full of resources. And so I would just encourage people to learn about this. Even if you think this issue doesn't affect you, it might affect someone you know, and you don't know because they're too embarrassed to say. Right. So you can become the resource in your community, and I would encourage people to try to do that.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time out today, Rita, to speak with us about the importance of these types of clinics, these types of actions within our community. We definitely appreciate the partnership and the advocacy work that you've done and that the Cannabis Patient Advocacy Association has done and continues to do. And we, again, just we're hopeful that some of the things that we spoke about will continue to evolve and take place in this space, and
yeah, no, we're
hopeful
hopeful too. We are, and we appreciate the ability to partner with you on this really important event.
Thank you very much again for joining us today, and we'll see all of our patient community, those who have registered for the Expungement Clinic, next Tuesday.
Yep. Have a good one.
You too.